Hey everyone, I'm Sinai, and today I'm here to explain to you guys what EVs, IVs, and natures are in Pokemon. Currently it is Generation 9, but these mechanics have remained virtually unchanged since Generation 3, and it appears to be unlikely to change for future generations anytime soon. If it is of any help to you, there are timestamps throughout this video, so you could hopefully find the information you're looking for much more quickly. EVs, IVs, and natures are all factors that affect your Pokemon stats, but they are fairly hidden and obscure in game, so their effects are not always widely known or understood. To help explain these values, I'm going to use Pokemon Showdown, a community built Pokemon team building and battle simulation website, since they're much more visible there when you're customizing your Pokemon. Before we get onto that though, let's quickly talk about a Pokemon's base stats. From a surface level, it should be fairly intuitive that each Pokemon has different stats, meaning that they are stronger in different ways. And when a Pokemon evolves, they get stronger. They also get stronger each time they level up. This is all because every species of Pokemon and each stage of evolution have their own base stats. EVs, IVs, and natures are all modifiers or additional points to a Pokemon's base stats, and all of these factors are what contribute to that Pokemon's final stats. And all of these factors are scaled up as the Pokemon levels up. Effort values, or EVs, are additional points that you can add to a certain stat by training a Pokemon. Each stat can have a maximum of 252 EV points, but you can only have a maximum total of 510 points on your Pokemon, meaning that you cannot maximize your EVs in all 6 of a Pokemon stats at one time, and you would have to allocate where you want them. You only gain a potential point in a stat from EVs for every 4 EV points you have. At level 100, every 4 EV points that your Pokemon has in a stat will gain you 1 additional point. At lower levels, you will still need multiples of 4 to be able to make a difference, but the final stat of a Pokemon is scaled and rounded down at lower levels, meaning that not every 4 EV points will actually make a difference. With 252 EVs on a certain stat, you will gain an additional 63 points on it when this Pokemon is at level 100. EV spreads of 252, 252, and 4 are fairly common when building a competitive Pokemon. You want to make sure that a Pokemon is as effective as possible in the job you built them to do, so you maximize the couple of stats that they are going to rely on to do it. And you'll have an extra 6 points to spend, but really only the last 4 points matter. But it barely makes a difference, and you can just use it to get a tiny boost on something nice. For example, if you had a Pokemon like Garchomp, he is a fast and strong physical attacker. So if you were to build him to, say, be an all-out attacker, you'd want him to be strong to be able to knock out Pokemon in one attack, and fast so he can do so before the opponent can return any damage. In this case, you would also want a nature that boosts your speed too, to make sure that you outspeed other threatening fast mons that you are naturally faster than. But I'll talk more about natures later. You're not always going to need 2 stats to be maximized though. It's all about compromise. You can try to precisely train your Pokemon to do things like barely outspeeding other Pokemon, or surviving specific attacks, or making sure that you have just barely enough attack investment to knock something out that you have in mind. For example, if I were to build Volcarona, I'd want it to at least be faster than Breloom, a Pokemon with 70 base speed that can be fairly threatening to many other Pokemon, but Volcarona can somewhat handle. If we want to make sure that Volcarona is faster than Breloom, we will need its speed to be at least 1 point higher than Breloom at its maximum speed. With the extra remaining points, we can invest it in defense to handle Breloom's physical attacks and other Pokemon even better. Quiver Dance is a fairly common move to have on Volcarona to boost its special attack, special defense, and speed by 1 stage or 1.5 times from each use of this move. And if we would like to, we could outspeed the fastest Pokemon in the metagame, Dragapult, with a little more speed investment. Keep in mind that since we're not maximizing our own speed, we will now be slower than a Pokemon like Ceruledge at its maximum speed, if we don't invest more in our speed, even though our base speed stat is higher. This kind of optimization is by no means always necessary, but if you are intensely dedicated to trying to optimize a Pokemon, you could try to consider this. But be careful, if you calculate to just barely live an attack or barely outspeed a specific Pokemon, you could still lose to something that you didn't prepare for. I recommend keeping things simple and intuitive until you have tested your Pokemon to know what situations and matchups they struggle in, when you need them to get value, and most importantly, what kind of compromises you could get away with. Like, for example, I could train my Volcarona to specifically outspeed Ceruledge or Dragapult after Quiver Dance, but in what situation would I like to attack them once they're on the field? They both resist my common attacks, which are Fire, Bug, and Grass type, and they can deal significant damage back in return. I would really like to just switch out from them if I can and not take a fight against them. Meaning, me trying to train my Volcarona's stats just to beat them is fairly pointless. You can see how many EV points your Pokemon has in-game when you check their summary with this graph, although it is mostly just an approximation. Except when a stat is sparkling, it means that it is fully maximized. So that's what EVs are, but as for how you actually train them, you gain these effort values when you battle Pokemon in the overworld. Each time you battle a wild Pokemon or a trainer in the game, not only does your Pokemon earn experience points to level up, but they also earn EVs. In this game, because of the permanent team-wide XP share, each battle will affect the EVs of your whole party. But auto battles do not actually affect your EVs. Each Pokemon gives you a certain amount of EVs and specific stats upon defeating them. For example, all forms of Tauros give you 1 attack and 1 speed EV point, while Tatsugiri gives you 2 special attack EVs, and defeating a Starly would give you 1 speed EV. If you wanted to train a specific stat on a Pokemon, you can equip a corresponding power item on them. This would make them gain an additional 8 EVs of a certain stat each time you would have normally gained EVs. These are the various power items in the game and what stats they help to train. You can buy them at Delibird stores. So if you put a power bracer on a Pokemon and you defeat a Tauros, you will gain 9 attack points and 1 speed point instead of their regular 1 and 1. If you wanted to know how I like to train my Pokemon's EVs, I plan on making a video very soon talking about my favorite training methods and locations, and I'll link it in the description when it comes out. You can also increase your EVs by using items. Vitamins can be bought at Chansey shops, and each will give you 10 EV points in a certain stat. Feathers can be found on the floor of Castleroya Lake, but you'll also get your fair share of them from Terra raids. Each feather will increase a Pokemon's EV by 1 single point. If you mess up and you accidentally give a Pokemon more EVs in a certain stat that you didn't mean to, don't worry. You could lower their EVs in a stat by feeding them specific berries. Each berry will lower their EVs by 10 points. The game will let you know when the stat is completely reset to 0 when it tells you that this stat can't go any lower. These are the kinds of berries available, and you can pick them up off the floor of certain areas of the map. Now, individual values, or IVs, are also additional points you can get in your stats, and they're usually determined by the time you catch or hatch a Pokemon. You can't train them through raising or training a Pokemon through battling. So that means that these IVs stick with the Pokemon from birth. Or, at least that's the idea. You can also spend bottle caps at a certain NPC to hyper-train Pokemon, which will maximize a chosen stat's IVs on them. One of the most common ways that I know to get bottle caps is from Terra raids. So besides how you get them, what's the difference from EVs? The big difference is that you do not have to allocate and distribute your IVs. You can have a Pokemon with the maximum amount of IVs in all of its stats. Each stat can have a maximum of 31 IVs and a minimum of 0. At level 100, each IV point a Pokemon has in a certain stat will gain you a single additional point in that stat. The effective IVs are scaled down when the Pokemon is at a lower level. When you catch a Pokemon from the wild, the IVs of the Pokemon you get will be randomized. So each of this Pokemon's IVs will be a different random number between 0 and 31. It is possible to reliably catch Pokemon with a few perfect IVs in random stat categories through something like Terra raids, and you are able to pass down a Pokemon's IVs through breeding. If you want to learn how to breed Pokemon to get great IVs, I plan on making a video soon talking about it, and I'll link it when it comes out too. You can see what your IVs look like by going into your boxes and pressing plus when you hover over a Pokemon to use the judge feature on them. This is only unlocked once you beat the game. It's also just an approximation too, except when it says no good, which means that you have exactly 0 IVs in that stat, or best, which means that you have a perfect 31 IVs. In competitive Pokemon, most of the time, you're going to want to have maximum IVs in almost all of your stats. You are always going to want to have maximum IVs in your defensive stats, HP, defense, and special defense, since when are you going to want to die sooner to anything than you have to? Most Pokemon are going to want to have maximum speed IVs too, to be able to knock out other Pokemon before taking damage. In rare cases, you might want to have less speed, like if your Pokemon is meant to be a tanky pivot with a move like U-turn or Volt Switch, to take a hit, then switch in a more threatening teammate. Or maybe you're using Trick Room, where slower Pokemon move first. Or if you're using a move like Gyro Ball, where the lower your speed is, the more damage it deals. And lastly, you are going to want to have perfect IVs in one of your offensive stats, attack or special attack. In most cases, you only need to maximize one of these because you are often investing your EVs to maximize either your physical or special attacks, and only using one type of damage in your moveset to optimize your Pokemon's damage output. This unused attacking stat is usually the one that people like leaving as their imperfect stat if they have to when breeding, since it is reasonable to get a Pokemon with 5 perfect IVs, while a Pokemon with 6 IVs is much more difficult. Special attackers are actually going to want to have purposefully low physical attack stats, especially Psychic and Ghost types, because they do not want to get hit harder by Foul Play, a 95 base power dark move where the attacker uses your attack stat instead of their own. From my understanding, you hurt yourself in confusion using your own physical attack stat as well. Natures are like IVs in the fact that they affect your Pokemon's stats, and they are usually set from birth or when you catch them. The difference is that your Pokemon's nature is a small multiplier to your Pokemon's final stats rather than being additional points. Besides neutral natures, each nature will increase one stat by 1.1 times and decrease another by 0.9 times. The only stat that cannot be changed through natures is HP. This multiplier occurs after EVs and IVs are taken into account, so these additional points are also scaled from your nature. Often in competitive Pokemon, you're going to want to have a nature that boosts a stat that you find important, but decreases the offensive stat that you don't plan on using, unless you purposefully want to decrease your speed. You can change the nature of the Pokemon by using a mint on them, which you can buy from a Chansey store, but they are also commonly found from Terra raids as well. Alright, so that's all I have for you today. I know that this video could have been quite the information overload, it's especially if this is your introduction to these concepts, but they are fairly intricate, and I hope that I explained things clearly enough. If you ever forget some of these details while learning and trying to internalize this information, come on back to check this video out. Also, like, comment, and subscribe. No, but seriously. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and see you in the next one.